Okay, so we've got the cross, the lee sticks are in place. We've tied them down here, and the cross is laid out in the lee sticks. And we've got our tie-up cord here, and we're doing it a little differently than Jane Stafford's methods. Louët suggests to use separate pieces of warp. So this is a 15-inch warp. We'd actually make it into two 7.5-inch warps. So you'd have one on one side of the center tie-up and one on the other side. Since it's only 15, we're just not going to use the center piece right now. These two side tie-up cords are sufficient, as this will stretch out to 15 inches, and it won't be too tight. The issue that you get into is whether the tie-on cord will actually bend, and that won't be the case in this warp. So Pam's going to go through now and show you how to do the threading. Or first we're going to run it over the rattle, and then through the threading and the slaying and tying it on.
All right, so what we've done here is we've taken the center of the rattle, and I've measured out 7.5 inches on one side, 7.5 inches on the other side, and that's where my warp is going to be placed. And the center mark is already on the loom. All right, so now what I'm going to do here is I'm going to cut my ties that I used to tie up my cross when I was making my loom, making the warp, very carefully so that I do not cut the warp. Okay, so we're almost finished cutting the ties. All right. Okay, so this might happen to you. I have somehow missed putting this one thread through the warping bar.
Tie-on rod.
Tie-on rod, sorry. So we're going to take that off, and we're going to slip it on. Again, do our half hitch. Okay. Oh, our warp is now there. You can see that the cross, and now we are going to start laying it out on the rattle.
Okay, so in the Louët rattle, there's 5 sections. 5 dents is equal to an inch. We've got a warp with 18 ends per inch, so therefore you have to divide 18 by 5. Obviously you don't get an even number. So if we take 4 threads and put 4 threads in the first 4 dents and 2 in the 5th, 4 times 4 is 16 plus 2 is 18. That gets us our 18 ends per inch. So that's the kind of math you need to do to figure out how many ends per dent you want to enter. You also don't want to split threads. So there's 2 threads that form the cross. You don't want to put one in one dent and the other in a different dent. So always round your combinations in a way to keep 2s together.
All right, so now we're going to take the warp and start putting it through the rattle. And we are doing a 4, 4, 4, 4, 2. So here's my first 4. Let me go back and we take a second 4. Then go back, and you're going to grab another 4, taking 2 at a time. Just lay them out there. All right, so that's 4 sets of 4, and now I'm going to do a 2. And I'm going to go back and I'm going to start with 4 sets of 4 and a set of 2. And then we'll be back when I get all this done. All right, so I'm on my last little bit, putting through the rattle. So 4 and the last 4. Okay, so what I want to do now is secure my yarn so they're not going to come up. So I have a piece of extra yarn of a different color. And we're just going to wrap it around the rattle. Pull it back to the side and then just tie it off. This will be cut off later. Okay, and what this does is when you're playing with your warp, it's going to prevent your warp from popping out of the rattles. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to start winding the warp on the loom. All right, so as you've seen, we've secured the warp to the rattle. And all I'm doing now is just straightening out the warp a little bit so that we can start winding it. And I am trying to do this by myself. All right, just push it a little bit. Make sure our threads are lined up. Okay, now what I'm going to use to hold my warp in place is a case of water. I'm just going to put the warp down here. A little more straighter to the loom. And then we're ready to go back to the back. And the water is here to provide tension on the warp. You can use books, you can use anything else. If you have someone that can help you, they can be at the other end holding it. Okay, so now we're going to start winding the warp. So to start winding, I'm going to be lifting on the brake handle, turning the beam handle. And this will go rather slowly because I am doing it myself. So we're going to wind on a little bit, put the brake handle down. Now I have to go back and move my warp. I'm just going to go back. Give ourselves a little bit more warp.
Okay, so here we have a critical point to point out. As you're winding your warp on, you see the warp is going to go over top of these excess Texsolf, and some of the warp is going to go right onto the beam, and some is going to go over top of this Texsolf, and that differential would actually create a difference in your warp tension later on when you're weaving, and that's is something you need to avoid. So to avoid that, we put warp sticks in place, and Pam's laying one in here. And so this first wrap, we're going to put them one after the other, just so that you can eliminate that differential between the Texsolf and keep all warp threads from going in between and at different heights, if you think of this in a three-dimensional way. So Pam will wind the warp a little bit so that this warp stick gets tightened, and now put it in another one. And a little bit more winding, and another one. Gotta make sure it gets in there. We'll squeeze that one in a little below. Really need to get them in between.
And we're just going to continue winding on the warp, and I'm going to come one full turn around, and then I'm going to start again with the warp sticks, placing them in on top of each other, quarter return. Okay, and I just have to go and give myself a little more slack on my warp. Continue around with the warp sticks. Okay, now I'm just going to continue winding the warp, and I will be back with you after I've got the warp already wound on. All right, I have finished winding the warp, and I ran out of warp sticks, so I had to use brown paper. And all I'm doing now is I'm just going to cut the warp at the top, and then just pull it out of the rattle and let them fall. And then we are ready to start on the heddles. Okay, and we still have our cross in here. Our lace sticks are holding our cross, and that's going to help us when we come to thread the heddles.
So in order to have better access to the heddles, and you can get right inside the loom, you lift the back beam straight off, and you can also lift the beater up and out, and put that aside, and then you can get right inside the castle so that you can reach the heddles easier.
So now sitting to start my threading through the heddles, and I'm just doing 1 to 8. So we're just going to go under 1. If you notice my cross, I'm over, then under, then over, then under. And I'm just going to continue on till I have everything threaded.
We'll show this from the other side as well.
And we're just continuing with the threading. That's on heddle 4. Again, I'm watching the back for my cross, for my under over. That was under, so the next one is an over. Under. We'll have one more after this. We've completed the first 8. And I'm just going to continue on going from 1 through 8. And I like to tie them after I've done every 8, just so I know where I am. Alright, so I've finished coming through the heddles. I've advanced my warp so that I'll be able to pull my threads long enough so that when I'm putting them through the reeds, it's at a comfortable position for me to work with. So I'm just going to pull them all through. Don't get any in there. Okay, so they're all through. Push them down there. All right, so now that I'm through my heddles, I'm going to cut my lace sticks off on both sides and pull them out. Then I'm going to continue with threading the reed. All right, I've threaded the heddles 1 through 8. So when I'm slaying the reed, I'm taking the first thread from heddle 1 and putting it in the first space where my marker is. Then I will do 2 and 3, 4 and 5, 6, 7, and then it'll go 8 and 1. This is a 10 dent reed. So I am putting 18 threads in 10 dents, which is why it is a 1, 2, 2, 2, 2. And then I just continue on until I'm at the end. So there goes 6 and 7. And my 8th one will go with the first heddle of the next bunch. And then I go back to 1. Okay, I just want to give a little more explanation of what I'm doing here as far as slaying the reed. So I have 18 ends per inch, and I want a 10 dent reed. So in 10 spaces on my reed, I have to put 18 warp threads. So my first one, I'm working from the right hand side to the center, to the left. I've got 1 warp thread in my first dent, and then 2 warp threads, 2 more warp threads, 2, 2. Then I go back to 1 warp thread and 4 more sections of 2 warp threads, which would go into my 10 dent reed, which will give me 18 threads in the 10 inches. So sorry, in the 1 inch. All right, so I'm going to put the warp, start putting the warp on the tie-on rod. And what I've done is I've started in the center, divided my first little bundle in half. Just make a little knot. And tie it on. Okay. So the knot I'm using is a bow knot, and it's just going with half of my yarns. Tie and a little bow. And I'll go to the other side of the center. I'm just going to keep working back and forth from the center out. Just finishing up tying on. Okay, starting in the center, working our way out, we're going to go back and just work on the tension. So just undo the bow. Pull up, tie it off. So what I'm working on is making my tension on my warp. As you can see, it's very loose here. So I'm trying to get it all the same tension. So I'm going to just go across the board. From the right side to the left side. Pulling up on the knot and remaking a bow. You can see how there's starting to get an equal tension. So our tension is now even across our warp, and we can start weaving. Thank you very much for watching our demonstration on warping the David loom.